Hello, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale, everyone. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are going to be talking about not Chamber of Secrets, sorry, Prisoner of Azkaban, Chapter 5, The Dementor. But let's get to our recap first. So, our chapter opens with a chaotic beginning to get to King's Cross the morning following Molly and Arthur's chat about Sirius Black and whether or not to inform Harry of the truth of it. At King's Cross, Harry is pulled aside by Arthur so Arthur can tell him about Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban. But Harry cuts him off to inform him that he overhear the conversation between Arthur and Molly the night before. And just before Harry gets on the train, Arthur makes Harry promise that he won't go for looking for Sirius Black, which confuses Harry at the moment, and it confused me at the beginning when I first read this book. So we all know, most of us know what's coming. So for now, Harry's a bit confused as to why he would go looking for Sirius Black, knowing that Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban to come after him. So once aboard the Hogwarts Express, Harry, Ron, and Hermione find a near-empty compartment, which is interesting because for the first time ever, other than the witch who pushes the trolley and the conductor of the train, they haven't seen an adult aboard the Hogwarts Express before. But it is quickly determined that he is Professor R.J. Lupin, which is noted on his suitcase, and most likely the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. As he appears to be sleeping, the Golden Trio take their seats, and Harry proceeds to tell Ron and Hermione about the conversation he had heard between Molly and Arthur the night before. Harry also mentions not being able to go into Hogsmeade because he didn't get the permission slip signed. Then, as they're nearing Hogwarts, the train stops, and something boards the train. When one of the creatures enters their compartment, Harry passes out while he's hearing a woman screaming as he loses consciousness. Once he wakes up, Professor Lupin goes to talk to the conductor while the others explain what they had experienced while Harry was unconscious. Professor Lupin returns and explains that the creature is a Dementor while handing out chocolate to everyone to help with the after effects of the encounter. So, they finally arrive at Hogwarts, and Harry and Hermione are met in the entrance hall by Professor McGonagall. For Harry, it was about a discussion about his collapsing on the train because of the Dementor. And for Hermione, we don't know yet. So, we'll get the answer to that later in the book, I promise. But the first thing that I want to mention before I dive in too much this week is that now that we're in Prisoner of Azkaban, we're going to find a lot more detail in each of the chapters than we've seen in Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets at this point. So, a heads up, just expect that moving forward. I do expect the occasional lengthier episode, but I'm going to do my best to give lengthier, all-encompassing recaps for each chapter because there is more detail as we've moved into Prisoner of Azkaban now. So, this week, as you might expect, we're going to get into a discussion about depression because it is well known now that J.K. Rowling created the Dementors as a metaphor for her own depression. So this week will be a more educational discussion than any personal revelations that I might have to add. But, you know, I do have some, I do have experience with depression. So here we go. First off, I do want to say that I do believe, based on my own experience with depression, that J.K. Rowling absolutely nailed it when it came to actually describing Dementors and what they are and how they affect people. So we're going to go through some of the things that we know about the Dementors at this point. We know that they drain all the happiness out of the room. They force you to relive your worst memories while stripping away any sense of happiness that you have. Your body collapses sometimes if you have more horrific memories that the Dementor is forcing you to relive, such as Harry's fainting on the Hogwarts Express. Harry losing consciousness because of, we're not sure what he's hearing yet. Okay, he just hears a woman scream. But it shows, I believe, very well just how exhausting depression can be. Including things like how difficult it is to breathe, or how breathing feels heavy, or like you have something weighing on your chest. Or feeling like you're attempting to walk through wet cement. Okay, the exhaustion that depression brings to the patient, for lack of a better term, is a lot, and can be a lot at times. The cold fog, that spreading chill of a Dementor approaching. Again, throughout this book, we're going to get a lot more in depth with this, but the pure hopelessness where your future just shrinks to a mindset of, I just got to get through today. And this is why we often feel like things are never going to improve, but because when depression gets to the point where you are literally just trying to survive day by day, it becomes a lot. It does. So let's look at Professor Lupin's fix with this. Chocolate does not erase pain, but it does restart your system. Some small anchors, such as the warmth, the sugar itself, some sort of sense of connection, create some breathing room, thus showing that there are things that we can do to combat depression's effects in real time. I do like my chocolate. I do love particularly milk chocolate. So I love the idea that chocolate helps kind of, boost you back up after a Dementor attack. So let's start digging into some of the research so we can complete the connection between Dementors and depression. First, let's look at the core symptoms of depression. The first one we have is anhedonia, which is the loss of pleasure. That is the most common one we think of when we think of depression. Everything enjoyable turns gray, just as Dementors drain the happiness out of the environment. There's persistent sadness and hopelessness, that bone-deep despair where the future feels impossible, which we can liken to the chill that a Dementor spreads prior to as it's coming closer to us. Okay. Intrusive negative memories. This is an obvious one. Reliving trauma or the worst moments involuntarily, which is exactly what Dementors within the story force us to feel and to experience. I want to take a little time out here and explain something. In the early days of my PTSD, so the first couple years, really from the trauma event in May of 2013 to that point in May of 2015, around the 2-year anniversary mark, those intrusive negative memories would not stop. It's like that's where my brain was stuck, and nothing I did would work, which is why a substance abuse problem is often part of the symptomology for anybody dealing with PTSD, because you get to a point where no matter what you do, you can't get your brain to stop replaying the event of the trauma itself. And so it makes sense to me. And that is why I ended up developing a bit of a drug problem, because at the heart of it, you can imagine how painful it is when your mind is stuck on one traumatic event over and over, no matter what you do to shift your attention elsewhere. Like I said in a previous episode, PTSD is absolutely insidious, but trauma and PTSD specifically are its own diagnosis. Because yes, I have dealt with depression before, which is how I knew something was wrong with me when the PTSD hit. For the most part, I would say that I didn't have a lot of replays, that mental replay, until the PTSD hit. But that is just my personal experience with depression, separate from the PTSD. But this was definitely the major factor for me, is my brain would not stop replaying the trauma event. So let's get back to our core symptoms. Psychomotor retardation, physical slowing or collapse, such as seeing Harry just crumble to the floor. I can't imagine what that looked like to Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Neville, who were Ginny and Neville showing up to the compartment. I didn't mention it in the recap, but when the lights went out, just before the Dementor came in, Ginny and Neville came in trying to find, some friends, to kind of help them out here. So fatigue and exhaustion. Yeah, even basic movement feels insurmountable. It's that gravity feels like it's doubled. It feels like, something heavy is weighing on your chest and it's difficult to breathe, or it feels like you're trying to move through wet cement. The fatigue and the exhaustion are very much real. Again, based on my experience with depression. Emotional numbness, feeling detached or hollow, much like the Dementors leaving us feeling kind of empty. And it was described in this chapter for Harry like he had gotten over a bad bout of the flu or something. He had been through a sickness that lasted a couple of weeks when he had regained consciousness. Irritability and agitation, heightened frustration despite exhaustion, such as, the tension within, the compartment, because everybody's, worried about Harry, but everybody else also had their own experience with the Dementor when it entered their compartment. So I can easily imagine how that would make you feel irritable and agitated. And the final piece of the puzzle, as far as the core symptoms, are cognitive fog. So poor concentration, confusion, indecisiveness. Again, processing shuts down, just like that post-Dementor haze that Harry described, feeling like he had been ill. Some of the physical and somatic symptoms, we also see sleep disturbances, either in the form of insomnia or hypersomnia, meaning you sleep all the time. So either you don't sleep or you sleep a lot. Appetite changes, weight changes. Again, either not eating a lot or eating too much to compensate. Aches and pains. Unexplained physical complaints, including circulation issues, thus that cold penetrating feeling that a Dementor radiates, I guess would be a good word. And then psychomotor agitation, so restless pacing or just stillness, frozen in fear or frantic escape attempts, in other words. Some of the neurological and physiological parallels, let's look at some of these. Amygdala hyperactivity. So the amygdala is basically our fear center. It's what determines and signals fight or flight, fawning or freezing. It's the trauma/fear center overdrive. In this case, forcing that memory replay, which at this point in the story, it's just Harry hearing a woman screaming. He doesn't have any context for it just yet. Another neurological, physiological parallel is dopamine and serotonin crash. So that pleasure reward system fails. Again, leading to the anhedonia, and motivational loss. I always kind of butcher anhedonia. Sorry. Cortisol dysregulation. Fight or flight exhaustion leaves that cold numbness. We're going to talk more about cortisol as that stress hormone and the effects of that later on in this chapter. We're going to have several conversations, hopefully getting a more thorough overview and understanding of depression as we move throughout this series. But for now, we're just kind of going over the basics. Anyway, so the cortisol dysregulation. The HPA axis overload, which is the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis. Stress response burns out, leaving shutdown, so nervous system freeze. Basically, this main stress response system gets stuck in chronic overdrive. Some behavioral and cognitive aspects to this are rumination, stuck replaying negatives, not necessarily in my case, just a moment ago talking about the PTSD. This I see as more of that negative mindset and that negative self-talk versus something that I can't control my brain to stop doing, if that makes any sense. So that tends to get into a sense of worthlessness and guilt, and because there's a lot of irrational self-blame when you're struggling with depression. There is suicidal ideation. In severe cases, better off dead thoughts. So we're going right to the Dementor's kiss as the ultimate despair. Again, we're going to dive deeper into this when we get a better idea of what the Dementor's kiss means. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who is reading along the books for the first time with me as I do this podcast. And then, of course, there's social withdrawal. A lot of us prefer to isolate when we're depressed. And it's just a normal part of how depression works for a lot of us. So let's look into Professor Lupin's intervention mapping, because I thought some of these were kind of interesting. So chocolate or some other form of quick carb restarts dopamine and serotonin for function, but it is not a cure. It's just that in the moment, feel a little bit better type of thing. It also helps to name the threat, because once you name it, you're reducing the amygdala panic. In this case, Professor Lupin explaining that was a Dementor. So when you find yourself in a depressive episode, think of it as a Dementor. The Dementors are swirling around. Okay? Happy memory focus, which counteracts that rumination. So again, further into the book, but there's some training ahead that we're going to get into, some real world training to help with the happy memory focus. And then restoration, not erasure. Partial recovery enables coping until stronger intervention can be sought out. That was simple. Thankfully, there are things that we can do, especially if we're struggling to access proper therapy, which is the key for me to this entire podcast, is how have I managed a lot of the shit that I've managed on my own without the proper therapy that I needed. So again, before we dive into these, let me reiterate that I will always, always, always advocate for proper therapy if you can access it. This first one you're not going to like. Nobody likes to hear that exercise makes us feel better, but it's not just our physical health. I have found over the last several years that when I can properly get back on track with my daily workouts, that I do so from my mental health perspective. Yes, of course, I would like to lose weight. Who wouldn't? Yes, I'm in my 50s. I would like to stay as healthy and as vibrant and as active as I possibly can, as long into my life as I possibly can. Well into my 80s or 90s would be great. But to get myself going, it is always about my mental health. Even on the days when I just don't want to do it, I can usually get myself to start moving anyway, because I know I'm going to feel better with my mental health once I get my workout done. So I'm sorry to have to say that it's exercise, but it's exercise. Thankfully, you don't have to do a lot to get some benefit from it. They're suggesting that you move rhythmically in some way for just 5 to 10 minutes. And you can do this multiple times throughout the day if you want. So walking, dancing, doing arm circles, even just standing in place. Anything to get your body moving so the endorphins can start kicking in. Go outside in the sunshine for just 10-15 minutes. Step outside. If the weather doesn't permit it, go sit near a window. That helps too, because serotonin helps boost my apologies. A serotonin boost, which is what we get going outside and being in the sunshine, helps fight that cold fog. There we go. And we all know Dementors don't like light and happiness and, stuff like that. Breathing exercises, specifically what I have listed here is the 4-7-8 breath. This is personally one of my favorites. You inhale for 4 beats, seconds, however you want to do it. Hold for 7 beats or 7 seconds, and then exhale for 8 beats or 8 seconds. And you work through that 4 times. That helps shut down that HPA axis overdrive. Having a warm anchor. So holding or drinking a mug of hot tea, hot cocoa, coffee, something warm. Weighted blanket, that is my current favorite. A warm shower. I've been known to do that in the middle of the day when I'm just feeling all of those things counters the physical coldness and the nervous system freeze. You might be noticing my comfort hoodie. I am a huge fan of this company because their heavy-duty sweat sets actually do feel like I'm wearing a weighted blanket. It's not that heavy. It's not as heavy as my weighted blanket, but it does have that same effect on me. So I wear my sets like all winter long. And this is the second winter I am living in my comfort sweat sets because it's a bit of an anchor for me. It helps me stay regulated throughout the day, believe it or not. Name it. Just name it. Say aloud, oh, this is a Dementor attack, or this is a depression fog, whatever you want to do. You don't have to stick with Harry Potter stuff. You really don't. But I find that being able to do something like that where, you know, if I were to notice myself in a bit of a depressive moment, oh, there's a Dementor around, you know, to help lighten my mood, first of all. But like I said, whatever works for you, but name it. Because naming it reduces amygdala panic by 30% instantly. And as always, I do have to say, for the nerdy science types like me, my references for all the information I got from or for this episode are going to be in my show notes. So, a pleasure schedule. I thought this was interesting. A little 10-minute mini vacation by doing just one thing that brings you joy, happiness, or whatever. Whether it's listening to music, whether it's sitting with a pet and, you know, giving them pets, you know, your dog, your cat, whatever. Doodling, writing, drawing on a piece of paper. This one helps fight anhedonia, especially if you can do it when you're not motivated, you know. And I don't care if you take a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and just, you know, scribble for 10 minutes. Just a little mini vacation is the way they called it. So, a gratitude micro is what this one was called. Basically, you name 3 not terrible things today. So if I were to do that today, I would say that my coffee was nice and warm this morning. It's cold. We had a warm snap here in Michigan for about a week, and now we're back to more normal temperatures for the second half of February. But it's still warmer than what we typically see in February. So I am thankful for that. Hearing the birds singing, just anything small that it doesn't have to be a big, major, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. Just something positive. A little thing. My coffee tasted great this morning. Again, whatever works for you. But they recommend this one because this one helps rewire those rumination pathways. So if you're stuck in that more negative mindset, that negative self-talk, this is one that tends to help with that. A social ping, if you have one. Text one of your more uplifting type of friends or whomever with no expectations. Connection cuts isolation without draining your energy. To this, I would also add looking for videos that make you laugh. I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a couple chapters. I'm sure you know why, for those of you familiar with the series. A good laugh triggers endorphins and drops cortisol by 30% and restarts serotonin production. A sleep box. This doesn't mean actually sleeping in a box, okay? Same bedtime within no more than half an hour, either way, every night. Depression thrives on chaos, and rhythm or a rhythmic schedule helps restore dopamine. And then positive self-talk. This one is going to take some more intention. Again, based on my personal experience with depression and doing what I can to feel better. But it is possible. Positive self-talk. So replace something, along the lines of I'm broken or something's wrong with me with this fog will pass, or again, when I'm aware of it, I just simply either shout aloud to an empty room or in my mind, expecto patronum. I do. I really do. Anyway, research proves that this flips the brain chemistry from despair to doable. It's not perfect again, but, you know, expecto patronum. That's enough to get me a good chuckle. And so, you know, I've been using that one a bit more recently. Anyway, take a breath, Gabe. I know this was a more intense conversation this week, but it's one that I believe that must be had. Depression can be just as insidious as PTSD, and I've had a lot of experience with both. In fact, when I was doing my research, I was genuinely surprised to find that we see an over 50% comorbidity rate, meaning that one often accompanies the other. So if you are clinically depressed, you're going through a serious depressive period in your life, it's likely, highly likely, that you've got PTSD going on. Or to flip the script, with my experience, I would say, yes, I had the PTSD, but there was also depression accompanying that, because they often happen together. That's what comorbid means. So, with that, we will wrap up this week. I'll be sharing some more personal experiences with depression specifically as we continue through the book, as I said. Until next week, we will be talking about... until next week. Sorry, it's been one of those days. Next week, we will be talking about Chapter 6, Talons and Tea Leaves. Until then, that's where it came up with. Go do something fun and have yourself a bit of chocolate. Professor Lupin's orders. See you next week.